In the summer of 1908, two brothers from the McLeod family set out from the bustling frontier town of Edmonton, Alberta, with nothing but packs on their backs, a few worn tools, and the kind of desperate hope that only gold can breed. They were not the first men to vanish into the vast, trackless wilderness of the Nahanni Valley, and they would not be the last. But what the searchers found when they finally followed their trail would haunt the region for generations, carving a name into the maps that still chills the blood of those who whisper it: the Valley of the Headless Men. The Mackenzie River, a coiled serpent of dark water, winds its way through the subarctic barrens of Canada's Northwest Territories. It is a landscape of impossible grandeur, mountains that claw at the sky, their peaks perpetually dusted with snow even in the short, frantic summer, valleys choked with ancient spruce and fir, where the light filters down in a perpetual, green bloom, and the rivers, countless and cold, that run with the meltwater of glaciers that have stood for millennia. It is a land that has always been more a part of the spirit world than the human one. The Dean people, who had lived in the shadow of these mountains since time immemorial, knew the region as the land of the Naha. They were not a friendly memory. The Naha were said to be a race of terrible giants, fierce and powerful, who descended from the mountains to raid villages, killing and beheading their victims. The Dean fought them for generations until, according to legend, the Naha were driven back into the high valleys, where they vanished into the earth. The Dean left the region alone after that, believing it to be taboo, a place of darkness where ancient evils still lurked. The white prospectors who began filtering into the Northwest Territories in the late 19th century cared little for such tales. They were a different breed of men who had seen the Klondike gold rush of '98, men who had staked their lives and their futures on the thin, brilliant veins of where they believed ran through every uncharted mountain. They were men driven by a single, feverish certainty that the next river, the next valley, held the motherlode, the strike that would lift them from the mud and the cold into a life of wealth. In 1908, the McLeod brothers were two such men. They had heard the rumors circulating in the saloons and trading posts of the north, whispers of a valley beyond the Mackenzie Mountains, a place of subarctic paradise, where the ground was warm from sulfur springs and the rivers teemed with fish. But more importantly, they had heard talk of gold. Not just the glittering dust of a placer claim, but real gold, coarse, heavy chunks of it, just sitting in the riverbeds, waiting to be picked up. It was a story that had been spun by the great mountain man and explorer Albert File, a legend in his own right who had been probing the mysteries of the Nahanni since the early 1900s. File had mentioned seeing gold in the gravel of a river he called the South Nahanni. For File, a man who loved the wilderness more than gold, the discovery was a curiosity. For the McLeod brothers, it was a destination. They were experienced woodsmen, but the expedition into the Nahanni was a leap of faith into the unknown. The journey took them months. First by rail to the end of the line, then by riverboat and pack train, and finally, for the last brutal stretch, on foot. They had to navigate the treacherous canyons of the Liard River, then cross the formidable Mackenzie Mountains, a jagged wall of rock that tested the limits of human endurance. They were forced to cache supplies, marking trees with blazes that they hoped would lead them back home. They were men of immense grit and courage, and they pushed through, driven by the whisper of gold that grew louder the deeper they went. They were never seen alive again. When the brothers failed to return, a search party was organized. It wasn't a frivolous expedition, but a grim necessity in the unforgiving North. Men and their families went missing all the time, but the McLeod brothers came from a prominent family in Edmonton, and their disappearance drew serious attention. The search party, consisting of their family and experienced trackers, followed the brothers' markings through the Mackenzie Mountains. They found their caches, untouched, and their final camp on the banks of a river that would later be named after them, McLeod Creek, a tributary of the South Nahanni. What they found there was not a camp of survivors but a scene of unspeakable horror. The remains of one of the brothers were found propped up against a tree, a bullet hole in his chest, his head missing, cleanly severed from his body. The second brother's body was found a short distance away, also beheaded. They had been decapitated, and their heads were never found. They had been prospecting, not fighting, and there was no evidence of a struggle that would explain such a brutal, ritualistic act. The McLeod brothers became the Valley of the Headless Men's first famous victims. The name was not just a label, it was a prophecy. The tragedy was front-page news across the country. It was a story that captured the public's imagination and chilled it to the bone. The how and why of their deaths were a complete mystery. Had they been murdered by a rival prospector who had followed them into the wilderness? Had they stumbled upon a hidden trap set by the Naha giants, a grisly warning to stay away? The official line from the authorities was that the brothers had died in a dispute with a half-breed or an Indian, but no one was ever charged. The case was left open, a gaping wound of unresolved justice. The country moved on, of course. The First World War soon consumed the headlines, and the remote tragedy of the frozen North faded from memory. The trail went cold, and the wilderness swallowed the crime. But the story did not die. It sat in the archives of newspapers and in the oral histories of the North, a story told in hushed tones around campfires, a cautionary tale that whispered of a valley that killed men and took their heads. The mystery would not remain buried for long. In 1917, the lure of the valley proved too strong for another man. This time, it was a prospector who had heard the same rumors of gold. He was an experienced man, a loner who had built a small cabin for himself on the banks of the South Nahanni. He set up camp, hoping to find his fortune. A year later, a party of trappers came across his cabin. It was a burned-out, blackened shell. The man's body was found among the ashes, his skeleton charred and cracked. The most chilling detail was that the skeleton had been decapitated, and the skull was not with it. The fire had been fierce, but it had not destroyed the body before the head had been removed. It was a signature that was becoming impossible to ignore. The 1940s brought the next chapter of the valley's dark history. A trapper named John O'Brien was found in his sleeping bag, his body frozen, his head gone. The scene was surreal. He had been prepared for the cold, and there was nothing to suggest foul play, no wounds, no sign of a struggle, except for the fact that his head was missing. Whoever had done it had taken the time to remove it while he lay sleeping, dying from the exposure. It felt less like a crime and more like a ritual, an offering to something ancient and unseen. If the death of John O'Brien was a quiet horror, the death of Philip Powers was a public spectacle. Powers was a trapper who had been working in the valley. He was found frozen to death, a box of matches clutched in his hands. He had been sitting in front of a fire that had been burning for some time. He had died of exposure, but he had been in front of a fire. It was a riddle inside a tragedy. His head was missing. By the late 1960s, the Valley of the Headless Men had claimed a staggering number of victims. The official count of those who had vanished without a trace, disappeared into the mists and the mountains and never returned, was 44. Their names were etched in the lore of the North: trappers, prospectors, adventurers, and mountaineers who had entered the valley and were never heard from again. These were not tourists or novices, they were hardened individuals who knew how to survive in the bush. Their disappearances could not be chalked up to mere incompetence. The search for answers led to a peculiar and unsettling detail. Many of the bodies that were found, when they were found at all, were decapitated. The heads were never found. The pattern was undeniable, yet it was baffling. It defied every known motive. Was it a killer? A criminal enterprise? A cult? The decapitation suggested something ritualistic, something far beyond simple murder. The Dean legends of the Naha giants suddenly seemed less like myth and more like a warning. In 1964, a trapper named John Baptist emerged from the valley with a story that would send a chill down the spine of even the most skeptical of listeners. He reported seeing a strange, man-like being with a long black beard. The creature let out a growl and quickly disappeared into the dense brush. Baptist's account was not an isolated event. In the days and weeks that followed, several more people reported seeing the same being. He was described as a hulking figure, over 7 feet tall, wearing a mooseskin kilt and carrying a primitive stone club. He had short, dark hair, clawed fingers, and long arms. His face was black, and his eyes, menacing yellow or red, burned with an unearthly fire. The eyewitnesses recounted strange whistles and high-pitched, disturbing laughs that echoed through the valley at night. The creature had a terrible smell, was a swift runner, and was said to have hypnotic powers. Some reports even suggested he would kidnap women and children. The descriptions were so consistent that it was impossible to dismiss them as the ravings of a few isolated trappers. It was as if the legend of the Naha had stepped out of the Dean stories and into the present day. The Valley of the Headless Men was no longer just a place of mysterious disappearances, it was a place where something was hunting. The Dean knew it. The elders warned the newcomers to stay away, telling them of the giants who had been driven underground but had not died. They spoke of a place that was not part of the normal world, a portal or a vortex, where the boundaries between the living and the dead, the past and the present, were thin. They called it a place of bad medicine. The mysteries of the Nahanni don't end with the giants and the decapitations. There are the stories of the Wahila, a creature that is described as a massive, wolf-like animal, powerfully built like a bear with a broad head and long, white fur. Cryptozoologists have speculated that the Wahila could be a surviving population of the ancient bear dog, a creature thought to have gone extinct millions of years ago. The legends of the Wahila, the Amarok, and the Shunkaworakin are remarkably similar, leading some to believe that they are all describing the same mysterious predator, a relic of a prehistoric world that has somehow survived in the impenetrable recesses of the Nahanni. The valley is also a place of strange lights. Unidentified flying objects have been reported in the skies above the Nahanni for decades. The lights are described as hovering, dancing, and moving in ways that are impossible for any known aircraft. Some believe these lights are the ghost lights of prospectors who died in the valley, forever searching for the gold they never found. Others think they could be connected to the portal or the vortex that the Deans speak of, a sign that the valley is a place where the laws of physics bend and break. The reports of UFOs in the Nahanni Valley are persistent and compelling, adding another layer of strangeness to an already bizarre location. Then there is the gold itself. The legends of the valley's wealth are as compelling as its horror stories. Men have risked and lost their lives for it. But the gold is elusive. Prospectors talk of a lost mine, a place so rich that the gold practically falls from the rocks. But no one has ever found it and lived to tell the tale, or if they have kept the secret to themselves. The valley is a place where greed and fear exist in a dangerous balance. The gold is there, they say, but the price of finding it is your head. This is not a story of a simple criminal conspiracy. It is something deeper, something more profound. It is a story of a land that has been a sacred and forbidden place for thousands of years, a place where the natural laws seem to be suspended, and where the past and the present have merged into a terrifying, supernatural landscape. The decapitations are not just crimes, they are symbols, a dark signature that has been written across the history of the Nahanni Valley. The case of the McLeod brothers was never solved. No one was ever charged with their murders. The police files are thin, the evidence cold. It's as if the legal system of the outside world was simply irrelevant in that place. The valley does not answer to the courts of men. It answers to older, more primal laws. In 1945, a celebrated Scotland Yard detective named Robert Fabian was called in to investigate the case of Charles Walton, an elderly farmhand who was found murdered in a village in Warwickshire, England, his body pinned to the ground by his own pitchfork. The case was linked to witchcraft and a pagan rite. Fabian was baffled. He couldn't find the killer. But imagine, if you can, the same detective trying to apply his methods to the Valley of the Headless Men. He would have found no witnesses, no coherent motive, and a motive that seemed to exist beyond the comprehension of the civilized world. The valley is not a place where ordinary police work can solve the puzzle. It is a place that refuses to be solved. In the annals of unsolved mysteries, the Nahanni Valley stands apart. It is not a singular event, but a pattern that has repeated itself over the decades, a cycle of death and disappearance that is almost ritualistic in its consistency. The McLeod brothers died in 1908. Their heads were taken. The prospector in 1917 died in his burned cabin, his head taken. John O'Brien died in his sleeping bag, his head taken. Philip Powers died by his fire, his head taken. 44 people vanished into that valley. It is a story not of isolated tragedies but of a place that is somehow consuming the people who enter it. There are theories, of course. Some say it is a secret government experiment, a place where the lines between Earth and another dimension are thin. Some believe it is a den of cryptids, creatures from a forgotten era that have not yet been discovered by science. Some, like the Dean, see it as a place of ancient evil, a curse placed upon the land long ago. Others still believe it is a hub for a more earthly conspiracy, a group of reclusive people who do not want the valley's secrets to be discovered. But none of these theories fully explain the totality of the phenomena. The beheadings, the giants, the strange lights, the disappearances, and the legends of the Dean all point to a single, terrifying conclusion: the Nahanni Valley is a place of profound mystery, perhaps one of the last unexplored corners of the world, and it does not want to be understood. The final haunting question that remains, the one that echoes across the years and across the howling emptiness of the Nahanni, is this: if the legends are true, and a tribe of ancient giants still lives in the hidden crevices of that valley, what are they guarding? What is so important in that valley that they would kill for it, and why have they been doing so for over a century? The Deans say it is a portal, a place where the ground is thin. Perhaps the Naha are not just killers but protectors, guarding a secret that is so dangerous, so profound, that it must be kept from the rest of the world at any cost. Perhaps they have not been killing for the sake of killing but to stop us from finding what lies beneath the permafrost, waiting to be unleashed. The Valley of the Headless Men remains a scar on the map of the world, a place of absolute silence and deep, abiding terror. It is a testament to the fact that despite all our science, all our rationality, there are still places in this world that remain beyond our comprehension. The answers we seek are not in the files of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police or in the reports of the few scientists who have dared to venture in. They are in the whispers of the wind across the high passes, in the growls of the wahila in the night, and in the silence of the Naha, who have been waiting for centuries in the dark. The McLeod brothers are gone. Their heads are gone. The valley has taken them, and it has taken the truth with them. But it has left us a warning. A warning that there are places where men are not meant to go. And that if we do go there, we may not come back the same. We may not come back at all.